BoA 2022-0006. Appropriating ordinance number 1, an ordinance making appropriations for operating city and even departments for the fiscal year July 1, 2022 through June 30, 2023. B. BoA 2022-0007. Tax levy and revenue appropriating ordinance number 2, an ordinance making tax levy and revenue assumptions for the fiscal year July 1, 2022 through June 30, 2023. C. BoA 2022-0008. Appropriating ordinance number 3, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds for fiscal year 2023. D. BoA 2022-0008. Ordinance number 4. General obligation grant anticipation notes, fiscal year 2023. E. BoA 2022-0005. An ordinance amendment section 17-221 of the General Code of Ordinances, authorizing additions and changes in permits, licenses, and user fees for the fiscal year 2022. Order approving the operating of prize fund projects. G. LM 2022-0133. Order approving the operating budget of the Ralph Water Skating Enterprise Fund. H. LM 2022-0135. Order approving the operating budget for the East Rock Park Communications Tower Enterprise Fund. LM 2022-0136. Order approving the operating budget of the All Memorial Enterprise Fund. J. 2022-0137. Order imposing a levy of municipal tax in the BoA Avenue Special Services District, fiscal year 2022-2023. K. LM 2022-0138. Order imposing a levy as municipal tax levy in the Town Green Special Services District, fiscal year 2022-2023. LM 2022-0139. Order imposing a levy as municipal tax levy in the Grand Avenue Special Services District, fiscal year 2022-2023. And LM 2022-0140. Order imposing a levy as municipal tax levy in the Chapel West Special Services District, fiscal year 2022-2023. These items are filed with the City Clerk. They may be inspected at room 202, 200 Orange Street, New Haven. Per order, the Honorable Adam Marchand, Chair, attest Michael Swan, City Clerk. If you need disability-related accommodation, please call 3 business days in advance at 946-7651 voice or 946-8582 TTY. In accordance with the City of New Haven COVID-19 requirements, all attendees must have masks. Public may send comments to public testimony at newhavenct.gov. So that's the official notice for today's meeting. Next, we'll have introductions from colleagues. We're going to start this time on my left.
Aisha Walker-Meyer, Ward 26.
Yvette Hamilton, Ward 24. Adam Marchand, Ward 25.
Frank Douglas, Ward 2.
Richard Furlow, Ward 27.
Thank you, everybody. And as you see, more of us are at the table, but we still have the flexibility to have a colleague or two sitting in the front row. And so we thank the city staff and the other presenters for their flexibility in addressing folks sitting right across the table from you, but possibly also addressing a colleague sitting in the front row or nearby in the gallery. So that notice took a very long time to read. maybe almost the one that's gonna take us to half the meeting. No, I think our meeting will be a bit longer, but it's not as long a meeting as the agenda suggests, and then it's going on. Items 1 and 2 are voting items, and we'll have presentations from the city staff on those. We'll ask for public comment, and we'll move forward. Items 3 through 7, those are 5 monthly financial reports. Most likely we'll be talking about the March 22 financial reports, so those 5 items will really ultimately be one. Okay? And then finally, the deliberations lists all of the ordinance and orders related to our yearly budget cycle. We are not doing substantive deliberations this evening on the general fund budget, the expenditure revenue side. But because we're going to talk about a portion of the item, we have to list all of those things. This evening, I anticipate, in addition to a few announcements that we may need to take action on the enterprise funds and special services districts, which will leave the main items related to our general fund budget for our meeting on Thursday. So 2 voting items, 1 monthly, a brief action on all the items listed in the budget, some announcements, and we'll be able to adjourn the meeting. So, one more quick announcement. Most folks who are here are well versed with microphones, so just on their mind. There's a button on the microphone, please do not push it. That would just turn it off, and it's not helpful to do that. You might notice that I'm keeping the microphone very close to my mask face. We would ask people who are speaking to do that, so that Don may hear and everybody else will be able to hear you well. It's sometimes tempting to put it down, but when you do that, people can't hear you. So you need to keep it close to your mouth. And as you look around, bring that back. So that's the announcement of my phone. Item 1. Building solutions contract, trees, control. Once you two gentlemen are settled in, we would like to release and access to the rest.
Switching to public schools. 100 Woodside Court, Trumbull, Connecticut, or 904. I think we have our microphone sorted out. Please carry it away. Thank you very much. This evening, you're looking at the approval for a contract for Honeywell Building Services to provide preventative maintenance services to the front-end server for the building management systems to approximately 25 of our schools. First, I would like to apologize for the lateness of this submittal. We had some communication issues along with myself, Renew, and some other issues that arise that prevented us from submitting it further. I want to assure the committee, along with the public, that this will not happen again. I have been working with Michael Bowman and staff to identify future contracts that require to come before you, and we will ensure a more timely submittal moving forward. This proposal is for this contract provides again building management services and preventative maintenance services to the building management software, which monitors how our buildings operate. So this is a very vital system. This is done under a sole source proprietary software. So this is the only group that can provide this service. We are on a platform of migrating to a different software, which is open network, which means that we'll be able to utilize different vendors for service and put it out to bid. Where this is a more a service that is only provided by Honeywell.
Thank you very much. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge our colleague, Governor Rodriguez, Alder of Fort Worth. Is that that's your presentation? Anything to add, Mr. Coburn?
No, I think Mr. Lamb said the basics of what this contract is for.
Thank you very much. Questions from committee members? Alder Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Marchand. Good evening, sir. The date's not cool. Yeah, that doesn't look good. First of all, because June's almost here. This contract is over. And we're only deciding now. Doesn't look right. All right, you say Honeywell is the only one that can provide this service, and what is it gonna take for you to merge off the Honeywell and put this out to bid? What does that effort look like?
So in order to do that, we have to change the entire building management system within each school. So there are approximately 15 to 20,000 different points that these systems monitor across the school district. We are about 20 schools into that process. So it is a substantial capital investment along with the project time in order to be able to do the migration.
So that sounds like we're chained to Honeywell. They have you by right now. Yeah. And is there a timeline that you're looking at to possibly merge into? I mean, what's the financial cost like with Honeywell as compared to if it was out there in the general public?
Well, what we are currently doing with the migration to a Tritium platform, we're doing about 3 or 4 schools at a time, and it's anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000. So it's a significant expense when you look at it across the district.
Somebody else. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Alder Hamilton. Before we continue with questions and colleagues, I'd like to acknowledge Alder Janet Morrison, Local 2. Next on the queue is Alder Tessa, followed by Alder Winfrey. Microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, can you explain a little bit more what this system does? Is this something that we have had or something new? Exactly what does it do and what kind of data does it collect and how does it help us?
So these are building management systems were put in at time of construction. So when the schools were built, these systems were put in. What they provide is a method for controlling the operation of the HVAC systems within the building. For as far as benefit, it gives us the opportunity to be able to monitor the operation of the system, to be able to show how the system is operating and make adjustments through a computerized method, which we can fine tune how much fresh air is coming into a building, the amount that dampers are opening and closing, along with if there's a system failure, it will provide notification. If the system is operating outside of its parameters for temperature, we can adjust temperature without having to go to the building. To provide us a remote capability that without this type of system we wouldn't have. And as we look at sustainability and the ability to be able to bring our buildings to operate more efficiently, these types of systems are going to be more and more required in order to be able to get the types of operation that efficient operations require.
Thank you for that explanation. My concern is that a lot of our schools, although most are new, have had issues from the very beginning with most of our HVAC units. And I know that kids have to be moved from a classroom if it's too cold, et cetera. How are we addressing those concerns? Because it seems to have been faulty from the start. How is this monitoring that, and how, what is the cost of the maintenance that was a mistake to begin with?
Well,
That was faulty, I should say.
I understand your question. Since I've been with I've only been with the district a year. So I can't attest to what has happened in the past. I've been looking at what I'm coming into and what steps we're gonna take to identify what is wrong, what it will take to make those adjustments to make the systems fully functional, and then how much it's gonna cost. So we have worked through, are currently working through our facility master plan, which we are doing as part of that, an assessment of the operation of a lot of our mechanical systems. The way that every single school has a different type of HVAC system in it. Some have direct air exchange and heat pump units, which are like the units that you see up on a roof. Some have what's called chilled beam, which is another type of system that operates by chilling a large steel beam and then pushing air across it. And then there's other systems that operate chiller, which is a large device that chills water and pushes it through a tower and then pushes water air through that, which goes out to air handlers within the schools. What we have been doing since I began with the district is looking at each of those systems for some kind of operational benchmark. So that we could say, is the system operating as it was designed? Yes or no? And then looking at the deferred maintenance that has happened over the years, as far as replacement of major building systems, and determining how we can work those systems into our capital budget, along with some of the ESSER funds that we've received that are going toward replacement of major building systems that are either at end of life or near end of life.
Thank you for the explanation of everything, but, and I hope that this Honeywell system can function with all of those various systems, and that it gets us answers. But earlier you mentioned that you plan to transition.
Yes.
So Honeywell's the only vendor out there right now, but there are more?
Well, for this type of
For this,
system,
okay.
there are a myriad of different building management systems that could have been chosen. When the buildings were built, these were the ones, this was the system that was chosen during construction.
And this one expires the end of June,
Correct.
and you are planning to have
So this would be something that would happen year
a
over year.
renewal.
Yes.
But
As far as I understand, there was a 10-year contract on this that expired, and that was part of the issues surrounding bringing this back for renewal.
But this isn't for 10 years.
No, this is only one.
And the thought is to move to someone else.
Correct.
And an RFP or RFQ will go out to other vendors. Is that what?
Well, we're transitioning to what's called an open network system, which is Tritium.
Yep.
And that system was selected prior to my coming into the city. So I don't know what steps were taken to come to that decision.
I think the overall issue why we still have Honeywell is from what Mr. Lamb said is the software that's currently installed, and I think it's 24 schools that this is in right now. About 24 schools is proprietary, so they're the only ones who could work on it. In order to get to what Mr. Lamb said earlier, of being able to have other contractors bid on it, that's the project that he's talking about on switching the software over, which is, it's a large scale project, so it's taking some time to do that, but hopefully, in the future, we won't have to rely on this one vendor and can bid this out to get the best prices possible.
Okay, so that's not happening tomorrow, it's in the future.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Chester. Alder Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you said you're doing it 3 or 4 at a time, and how long does it take to do a cycle of schools?
The 4 that we are currently working on has been about 6 months.
6 months. Okay. We have 24 left. So maybe we do need another 10-year contract.
I think that's one of the things, I think that's one of the things we're evaluating right now, as we continue to look at this. I mean, as Mr. Lynn said, it's also gonna be, there's capital contribution that goes to this depending on what the cost is. As you know, COVID has inflated some of the costs on a lot of things. So, that's something we're currently evaluating, but as Mr. Lamb said, this was something that kind of snuck up on us. It was a 10-year before, so now we're coming back, but it's certainly, if we need a multi-year agreement, that's something that we're gonna look for, and obviously would come back to the board for approval.
I guess I'm wondering if at that pace, it makes sense. Yeah, it does make sense to just stick with this system. I mean, I think in theory, going to an open source system would make sense, but if the transition's that slow and it costs, you said $300,000 to do 3 or 4 schools, is that correct?
All of these systems would need to
Be
eventually be
upgraded.
replaced and upgraded anyway, because they're all coming to the
end of their
to the end of their useful life.
Yeah, no, we agree with you all. The winter, this particular issue now just crept up, but it's something that Mr. Lamb and I have discussed, and it's possible with the amount of time it takes. You will see a multi-year agreement possibly come since it's proprietary software.
And this is just for HVAC. Do we have similar building automation systems for lighting or
No, not this time.
not this stuff? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. Further questions from colleagues on this item? Alder Chester.
Do you have it for this building right now?
Unfortunately, it's over.
Because it's cold.
For that, you have to speak to Mr. Ivan.
That's why I wanted that.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Further questions from colleagues? Seeing none, thank you for your time. I understand that you have Board of Education you go to, so. Good luck with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Now we will proceed to item number 2. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. There's no number to care.
All right, Michael Gormley, City Acting Controller, 45 Jefferson Road, Brantford, Connecticut.
That's one more member of our city staff joining me. Meeting is just good.
Patricia Clark, and I live at 47 Stuyvesant Avenue, New Haven, Connecticut.
All right, so I am gonna go through this. I planned on having the city's IT director here, but he had a family emergency and could not be here tonight, so he did give me some talking points, and I will answer this contract to the best of my abilities along with Ms. Clark. But what you have before you is a contract for the vendor Highland, which manages another software called OnBase. OnBase is where we store a lot of documents, primarily in Vital Stats and a few other city departments as well. What this contract is looking to do is upgrade the OnBase system that we currently use. The OnBase system is an enterprise information platform, which again is designed to manage content, process various services and cases. OnBase centralizes some of the important content in one secure location. And then delivers the relevant information that we need, such as vital stats with marriage certificates, death certificates, so on and so forth. So for example, in vital stats, we use this system for over 15 years to manage the vital stats records. We have not had any issues with this vendor. They've been a great partner. But what you have before you is a contract to upgrade the current system. And the reason that this is also before you is because it's a 3-year contract as well. That's the primary reason that we need Board of Alder approval. Now, while this older system is still supported, we're not able to take advantage of some of the latest software developments because we haven't upgraded. So this would include additional security features, improved productivity and features, and certain customer service areas that we're not currently supported on. Now, one of the biggest reasons that we also want to upgrade is because this would take us to a cloud-based solution. Right now, the software is currently on premises, which means that it's sitting on a server in our IT area being supported by our IT staff, which, as you know, in the information technology world, a lot of softwares, in order to get the most out of productivity, have gone to a cloud-based solution. And for this, it's easier for the city to manage because there's less IT involvement and it's really mostly on the vendor. One of the other reasons that we also want to upgrade is the upgraded software is more HIPAA compliant. So that is very important in this day and age. It does affect cities' insurance policies and other areas on HIPAA compliance and the way that we store secure documents. So we're also looking at this software possibly because of the HIPAA piece to be used in HR, labor relations, and other areas as well. So that's what this software would give us. But right now, a lot of the software is used in our vital stats area, which is why Ms. Clark is here. So I'm gonna just ask her to kind of give you a brief overview of how things have gone. I know the board has made some changes in her office regarding positions and so on and so forth.
Before you begin, I'm just going to recognize our colleague, Alder Ron Herb, Vice Chair of the Committee, President.
Thank you.
As I said, I am the registrar of statistics of the city. I've been in that position for just over a year. And we use Onbase daily because that houses the birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage certificates. So every time comes in to the office, which is pretty much the busiest office at City Hall, we have to look up there. It's a lot easier to look them up electronically than have to go to the office. So it has been the biggest cost saving, effective, time management tool, and everything.
All right. So for the cost of this 3-year contract, the total cost is $66,200 for the 3-year contract. This is for primarily the licensing within the contract, and then we do have some professional services. So we have the system migrating from the old system to the new system. Again, this is 15 years old, the current system, so there's going to take a bit of work with that. There's testing and admin assistance that the vendor would provide as well to vital stats and wherever else we decide to implement the system into, again, like I mentioned, HR on the HIPAA, medical records, so on and so forth. And just travel and some other project meeting requirements if they have to come on site with the city. Based on our estimation, this is saving us about 10% of the overall cost going to 3 years. Now, the 3 years was also a requirement by the vendor with these new systems. They're not really doing a year-by-year agreement with customers anymore. And I believe, just going through my notes, that I basically covered everything with this contract. So again, this is an upgrade. It's a 3-year contract with a total cost of about $66,000. We do have the funding in general fund to pay for the licensing for next fiscal year too. That was factored into the budget as we were doing the mayor's proposed budget as well. In the finance department, there's an IT maintenance support line that pays for all our, a majority of our software, our financial systems, these type of systems, police systems, other systems, which is the maintenance and support. Within the budget, the cost for the first year of this agreement, I think it's the first or second year, depending on approval, but it is within that budgeted line item as well. So, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions from committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. And before we go to committee members, I just wanted to ask you to repeat, break down the resolution before us. In the title, give $115,600 as the total cost over 3 years. So when you said 66, it seemed like it was missing $100,000, but maybe that was a component cost, or maybe that was just for 1 year. So if you could clarify the numbers. So
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you are correct. I did not scroll down to the payments going forward on this. So the 66,200 was the implementation cost of this agreement. The on-base licensing itself is 25,200. And what I can do is I can email the exact numbers to that 116, but those are the basic roundabout numbers to the 116 that my IT director gave me. But I will certainly double check that before this is approved, if this is approved, to get you those exact numbers.
that would be great to have that information. I saw that Alder Festa would like to ask questions. Any other colleagues should also raise your hands if they have a question. Alder Festa.
Thank you, Chair. Is this unlimited storage? The price includes unlimited storage, or is this something that we will have to address if we run out of storage?
I believe this is 500 gigabytes of Highland cloud storage. I can check with our IT director and see how much storage that we're using, but this was vetted through the IT office prior to being submitted. So I can only assume that the 500 gigabytes that's quoted in here is certainly enough. Again, there's also the option, to upgrade that storage as we use that in the future if needed. But right now, the primary use is really vital stats in one other department. So we can certainly revisit that as we continue to use the software.
Okay, so when you mentioned the HIPAA, which I did see that in the documents, we're not expanding to those other departments just yet, but we can because it is HIPAA approved.
Absolutely. Yes, this is one of the, this is a HIPAA approved vendor and software. So if we wanted to migrate another system in HR because they manage the medical records or labor or whoever it was, we could certainly do that if this contract was approved. This contract does not just limit us to vital stats, but just the city in general.
Okay, so it's expandable. And then my other question is, firewalls. There's a lot of hacking that happens. How protected is this information?
Yeah, we haven't had any issues with this vendor. And again, my IT director assured me that it was vetted. They have a vetting process for exact questions like that, especially when we move over to a cloud-based solution. So he was very comfortable with their cybersecurity policies there. Again, that's actually one of the reasons we should move it from an on-prem to cloud-based solution at the moment is, the city is very secure, but the less stuff that we have for hackers to sort of get on city premises and more in line with cloud-based solutions is the way to go. But The IT director and staff was very comfortable with the policies of this vendor.
And you mentioned we've had this. So
Yes.
how does it affect the productivity of your department?
So we use it constantly every day for Microsoft. We're looking at all the records, have everything on the system.
So time has been decreased per person that's coming in and requesting documents.
For example, one day when couldn't log into anything because all the computers were down, and I had to look everything up in the book. So mine was down to the front door. Versus taking a minute to look up something.
Yeah, and this should help with helping that productivity even more with document storage, faster processing, so on and so forth.
Efficiency.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all, Mr. Alderman Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the cost of our current contract with Expenditure and annual cost?
Yeah, the current annual cost right now is about $15,000, I believe, with the current system that we have. So again, even though, yes, it is an increased cost by upgrading, so again, we're going from a 15-year-old system to the most current system that they offer with this solution. So it is an increased cost. But again, I think that outweighs the staff time that IT spends on a server, having to back up the server and everything else because it's on premises now.
What are we paying for with the implementation piece of the contract? What's actually involved in?
So the implementation piece again is their training, their support. I think one of the biggest areas is making sure that even though it's within their system, it's an older system, is the migrating of the data to make sure nothing is compromised.
Okay.
Because again, we don't need Ms. Clark's office printing out invalid birth certificates or death certificates or anything like that. So I think when IT looked at the quote, they really wanted to make sure that it captured everything going from an older system to a newer system.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Winter. Further questions from colleagues? Further questions from colleagues? Seeing none, we'll move on to our monthly financial report. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm gonna wait to ask the public if they wish to testify until after this item. As of right now, I see no members of the public aside from city staff, elected officials, and reporters. But we will definitely give any late arriving members of the public an opportunity to testify on any of the above items after this presentation. Mr. Gorman, the floor is yours. And these documents have page numbers, which is wonderful. You will be sure to refer to the number.
Well, Mr. Chair, on my summary sheet, I have the page number, so I
There you
make sure I reference.
Good man.
All right, it's been a while since we've been in person on a monthly and had a printed book in front of us, so I will sort of go through the monthly, just where we're at. Again, we're catching up from the last 4 or 5 months on city financials. So starting on page 1 of 74, which basically gives a breakdown of what the deficit is. As you can see in the March monthly, the deficit for the city is at $7.8 million. This is currently down from 15.2 million that we've been, which was the high point that we were reporting in the last 4 or 5 monthly reports. So the deficit came down primarily due to better than expected tax collections that we were projecting, slightly better TT&P revenue on meters. Again, the additional Yale funding that the city would receive as well. And then on the Board of Ed, the deficit for the Board of Education dropping from $4 million to $1.9 million helped the overall city deficit as well. And then certain adjustments in other expenditures, such as the police department, when you look at overtime versus salary. And one of our other larger departments was the health department with their salary surpluses along with debt service. So moving on to page 5 of 74. Andy, well, let me premise, page 5 to 7 is really just a continued update on the balances of the ARPA program. So those two pages really show the programs that were already approved by the Board of Alders, showing the balances. For example, youth engagement was 1.5 million, I believe, and showing the balances and some of the programs that they did within that funding. So pages 5 to 7 really just show the program balances for the ARPA funding. Pages 8 to 15 show the continued spending of the CARES Act allocation that the city received. So again, prior to ARPA, the city received CARES Act from the federal government, which was approved by the CD committee and I believe the Health and Human Services Committee as well. Those allocations and programs went through those committees. So again, the monthly report just kind of gives you an outline of what those programs were and some of the balances left over. Pages 16 to 17 show the CARES Act allocation from the state of Connecticut, OPM that we received. Again, that was a pass-through from the state of Connecticut to the city. We are finalizing the report to go into the next monthly that was submitted to the state on that funding as well. So that's just a high-level overview of some of the larger federal funds we received. Continuing on to the general fund, which we'll look at the revenue side, which starts on page 21, is what I'm going to be talking about. So looking at page 21 again, this is the tax collections that you'll see. And we are projecting taxes to be about $2.5 million ahead of budget for fiscal year 22. That would equate to about a 97.5 to 98% tax collection rate. To be honest with you, we are looking at better than expected still as we move forward. So I do expect that number to grow during the fiscal year as well. Looking at page 22, that's the state revenue that the city has received. We have received, I'm sorry, I lost my, yes. Page 22 is the state grants that we received. The only grant that we have not received fully so far is education cost sharing, which generally comes towards April or May, the last payment. We do expect to fully receive the 142.5 according to their website, and and on the city side, the Mashantucket Pequot, which is about 5.5 million. We are slated to receive that as well. That is a revenue that comes towards the end of the year as well. But a majority of the state grants we have already received for this fiscal year. Moving on to page 23, which really starts our license permits and fees. So that's where both of our local revenues are. Building permits, I have a conversation every few weeks with the building official. He is confident at the moment that we will hit $14 million, which is slightly above budget, about $300,000 above budget for this fiscal year. One of the revenues that was really hit hard by COVID was TT&P meter receipts. Again, that we've seen a decline in the last 2 years. And we've sort of adjusted those as we've done the budgets in the last 2 years to kind of match what we're seeing. We are looking at about $3.7 million for this fiscal year as projected. Again, that's still slightly better. In the month of December, for example, we were only projecting about $3.2 million. So we did see some slight improvement in meter receipts, even based on, even though we're not going to hit budget, we're still seeing increased collections. Parking tags is still slightly ahead. It's the same concept that I just talked about. It's better than we expected, but it's still slightly, it's still going to be below budget for this fiscal year. That's the one that we are really looking at. Again, that's partially due to we did have some vacancies during the fiscal year on parking enforcement officers, which really do affect the collections that we receive within that funding. Going on to page 24, the item on here is that's really affected with revenues, the New Haven Parking Authority pilot payment. That's a revenue sharing agreement that has to do with the Air Rights Garage and is also based on their revenue. Again, like the city, the parking authority has seen a decline in their revenue as well. So we are looking at about a $1.5 million pilot payment compared to a $2.8 million budget. And so overall, though, based on some of the increases that we see in tax collection, the additional voluntary, we're looking at about $2.7 million actually ahead of revenue for this fiscal year if everything pans out. Again, projections, monthly report is a snapshot in time. Anything from now to the end of the fiscal year can certainly change these projections. Looking at the expense side, starting on page 28, which lists all our various departments. I'm just going to talk about a few that's looking at that's excuse me, that is has a surplus for this fiscal year. The health department is one of our larger departments that's showing a surplus for this fiscal year. And again, that's primarily due to the vacancies. We've talked about that throughout the budget process and at other monthly meetings. You know, we have a lot of nursing vacancies. They've had a lot of turnover in other positions. Right now, we're projecting them to have about an $818,000 surplus, which may go up during the fiscal year. Police is looking at a little less than $1 million of a surplus during the fiscal year. Now that does include the increased overtime that's reported in these monthly reports, which is also offset by the salary savings. Again, they're one of the departments that has had a ton of vacancies during the fiscal year. Expenditure reserve, we are looking at a slight increase in spending depending on how our COVID account and other accounts end up this fiscal year. Contract reserve, we are looking at possibly a savings. Again, contract reserve is one of the line items that's reserved for union negotiations or other salary adjustments or increases or what may happen during the fiscal year. I mentioned the Board of Education. So going on to page 29, what I want to mention on this page is really, you'll see a savings in debt service of about $2.2 million. That's primarily due to the refunding that happened as we did the bonding this year. We do have a slight savings in FICA and Medicare, which is based on a lot of our part-time and other positions being vacant for this fiscal year. The biggest factor that we're looking at in the general fund, which you'll notice on this page, is the medical contribution. So right now, we're about $11.9 million projected over budget on medical. And again, as we'll get into in a little bit later on down the line, that's due to our medical claims for this fiscal year. Going to page 30 is the Board of Education. That just gives you a snapshot of what I was talking about, of the Board of Ed going down from $4 million to $1.9 million. So they are attributing this to staffing attrition. Primarily, they have some savings measures on non-personnel that they implemented during the fiscal year that they're looking at, even with their increased costs in tuition and transportation. So again, that deficit is going down from 4 million to 1.9. Starting on page 72 is the medical. So again, the medical is really what's affecting this fiscal year. We've seen an increased number of claims during the fiscal year for retirees and active employees. Again, with COVID, we did see a delay, as we talked about prior, and catching up on claims now. We have started to see a leveling of sorts with the claims, starting with the month of January. And as you'll notice in this monthly report for the month of February, you'll see that we did experience claims go down. So you'll see it was about a $2.9 million decrease. What we're looking at now is really seeing where our claims going to end up. And we've been working with Anthem over the last few weeks to look at our COVID claims and what they're projecting out for next fiscal year as well, based on the activity that we've seen. But if you notice also for the month of March, we were at about 9.5 million, which is close to where we were last fiscal year. So what the human resources manager and I, Steve Brandy, are looking at is, are we starting what the baseline of claims will be going from now and into the future? And we're currently looking at where the month of April landed. As you know, it does take a few weeks for claims to reconcile when we get them from Anthem. So that's something that we're going to pay attention to. But again, the medical fund is really what's affecting general fund for this fiscal year, just based on the claim experience that we've seen. So again, this is a large book with a lot of information. So that's kind of the high level overview of the monthly report. Now, again, we are facing in this book a $7.8 million deficit. We have in the Office of Management and Budget been working under expenditure and other controls, working with departments on spending for the fiscal year. So we are working to get that deficit down as low as possible. As you know, in the past few years, past 3 or 4 years, we've been able to really minimize the city deficit. And again, that's what we're working on. We're looking at what we currently have committed to vendors. Do we need to spend that funding? We're working with the Board of Education. Again, there are some numbers in here that are fluid that may help, such as contract reserve. We are looking at, we did reserve an amount we're spending, but if we don't get to union negotiations, obviously that will lapse. So that would help the deficit. So there's a lot of moving parts to this deficit. We still have the American Rescue Plan as well that can cover some of the lost revenue if we do end up running a deficit. But my intention is to get that deficit down as low as possible before we have to use any of the federal funding that's allocated to the city. So with that, Mr. Chair, we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gormley, as always, for your presentation. I'm now looking
to colleagues to see those questions from Mr. Bowman about the monthly financial report, March 2020. Let's see, all that. And then all the one March, and then all the rest. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gormany, I have state numbers for educational cost sharing that don't match up with what we have. So here it says, and please, help me understand this, because it could be that I'm missing something, but here it states in our book on page 22, education cost sharing fiscal year 21-22 approved budget 142,509,525. And in the state allocation, it says 162,840,114.
Absolutely. So the state includes Alliance in that number. So remember, Alliance, we are an Alliance district. So we get a unrestricted amount of money that is geared towards the general fund that education can use for any educational purpose. And then we get a portion that's separated out by the state for Alliance, which we have to apply for. We have to tell them how much we have to apply for that money and tell them what we're spending it on, what new programs or continuing programs that we use to fund with Alliance. So there's actually, which I can send through the chair for everyone's reference, there's actually a grants portion on the state of Connecticut website that actually breaks this down on how much ECS money is for general fund and how much is actually Alliance for New Haven. But yes, when they publish the number, they publish one number, unfortunately.
Okay, because I have a statement that breaks it down, but I'm trying to see if it. So you're saying that educational cost sharing fund that's listed with the state includes the Alliance grant?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, there's that, so what is that, what are you referring to? Is that a published document by the state? What is it?
Yes.
Just for the record.
Yes, it's the, if I could get the full title, 2023 New Haven State Aid, but it shows fiscal year 22 as
So
well.
this is the page of the state website.
Correct.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then something came to mind that we had talked about, a couple of years ago, or actually probably more than a couple of years ago, is credit card statements. And I thought that we were going to include some. And it dawned on me today, or over the weekend actually, that we haven't seen any. We did see some a while back when we first requested them, but this is definitely pre-COVID. And some of the members on the board may remember the whole credit card conversation. And I know there's probably a ton of statements, but can requests be made through the chair or through you, through the chair, to somehow get a breakdown of spending for some departments? Because we look at these line item budgets, but then there's line items of line items of line items. And so we don't see a lot of the spending that happens.
Well, I can certainly work with the chair on your request, but again, with the procurement cards, if I have a budget of $1,000, it doesn't matter if I use a procurement card or a check. It all is within that budgeted amount of $1,000. So what you see when you look at the expenditures on the year to date include any type of payment that was made to a vendor, whether it's a procurement card, a check. We do wires to various vendors for different services. Any type of payment is included in that expenditure number. So there's no separate accounting or anything for that, because in order for a department to use the procurement card, they have to have an available budget to do so within what was already approved by the Board of Aldermen.
Right, except that we don't see what that $1,000 the example you just gave is actually going towards? Is it paper, pens, is it, you know,
I can certainly look into it, but not just for procurement. I think what you're talking about is something like an open checkbook where certain municipalities have that published where it shows the vendor payments and everything, because not just for procurement cards, but I guess what you guys get on is a high level overview of what's spent in the budget, but not just procurement cards. You can say the same thing for checks, right? Or wires. So, I mean, I'll certainly look into it. I know that was something that we were working on when the mayor first got in office prior to COVID. And unfortunately, like a lot of the projects that I have, just kind of, you know, went to the side. But it's certainly something I can look into. But I know what you're talking about, it's like an open checkbook type of platform.
you know, how you get your credit card statement at home and it shows all your spending, you know, how much you spent here, how much you spent there, et cetera. It'd be nice to get maybe a summary of those types of statements, whatever it is that the city uses for different purchasing purposes, whether it's a procurement card, a credit card, a checkbook, that there.
Overfesta, can I ask you a question for the sake of clarity, because I'll follow up with Mr. Berman on this. Are you looking for a transaction by transaction accounting of every expenditure that the city's incurred across the entire budget or particular place, or are you looking more at kind of a categorical analysis of which methods of procurement the city uses for which kinds of transaction?
All of the above, but with that, I know it would be a book, probably thousands of pages, to get it line item by line item. But you know how we get our end of year credit card statement that has the chart and it shows how much you spent on groceries, gas, entertainment, etc. I mean, even a summary of that, and with that, we can maybe ask for more details based on what we see. Does that make sense?
I think we should discuss this further. I think if you're talking about a transaction by transaction listing of all the transactions, it's so numerous, literally hundreds if not thousands of individual transactions. I'm not sure if we kind of staggers the long to think about that. Unless you're looking at a particular part of the city's budget. Or I'm trying to understand if you want to just double check that we're wisely using the different payment methods that are available to us. That's kind of what I'm on, because we do need our city staff to have a lot of work to do already. And compiling several tones and things it rendered to us in a format that's unintelligible and analytical capability. I'm not sure that's a good use of staff time. So I'm just trying to understand what the
Yeah, and I don't disagree in regard to wise use of staff time, but it's also wise for us to see that spending is being done responsibly and for the right reasons and purposes. And as I mentioned before, even if it's an end of year graph, which is just one page showing X% has been, I'm just gonna say, you know, pens, X% on paper. You know how it breaks it down on your personal credit card statement, entertainment, groceries, gas, just a one sheet like that is even good enough. And then from there, if we're questioning anything, we can get more details.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely take your request under consideration and discuss with Mr. Goldman what might be feasible that would get towards the goals I think that is particular.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if
Further
you-
questions?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Next on the queue, we have Taisha Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Gordon, I would say that, you're gonna work like your hardest to get the deficit down by the end of the fiscal year. Are you comfortable and confident that you will do that? And is there any other, mechanisms that you're planning to put in place, other than the control that you already have now?
So, thank you for the question, President Walker Myers. I am confident that we can get the deficit down further than what's printed in this monthly. Again, as I always say, the caveat is depending on what happens between now and the fiscal year, as you know, one day can just blow all the numbers away and it won't matter what I say. But we have put additional expenditure control measures in place prior to what we did during the beginning of the fiscal year. So right now, management budget, for example, is looking at, Board of Alders may have $50,000 still committed to the New Haven Register, for example. Do we really need to spend that entire $50,000, right? Because if we save off of that $50,000, it goes towards reducing the deficit. Because the way we calculated it as if we're going to spend that $50,000 just to see what the worst case scenario would be. So right now, that's what my staff is currently doing, is working with the various departments on those committed encumbrances. Because that is a big portion that's still left over. And again, we're also looking at what are we contractually obligated to pay between now and the end of the fiscal year. We're looking at, are there any more reimbursables due from grant sources? That's another thing. It's not a lot, we don't get a lot. But a great example is staff in my office, we developed a portion of CDBG because they work on that. So we're taking that into consideration. So there's still some mechanisms that we take into consideration at the end of the year that will certainly get that deficit down. But again, my goal as always is to get it to zero. And again, the Board of Education is obviously a factor in that deficit as well. We're working with their CFO and Mr. Lamb, who is here as well, because one of the unknowns really is tuition and transportation, because those bills come in, they don't come in, losing my words tonight, but they don't come in, you know what I'm saying. So we're working on every possible angle that we can at this moment. Honestly, I would love to get it down to zero if I can. That would be great. Again, my goal is not to use the federal funding if I don't have to, and that can go towards other things, or we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So having that reserve always helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam President. Further questions from colleagues for the winter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you had to use the federal funding, how much, is it correct, that can only cover, or for the most part, only covers lost revenues?
So the federal funding covers what's called provision of government services. So that means what you had to use, what you had to do to keep government going, right? So again, it's a tricky calculation, but it takes in, you can take expenditures into consideration, but only up to a certain threshold. So again, we also have the reimbursement, for example, for police and fire overtime within this budget, right? So that's one threshold that we're going to use ARP funding that was approved. But primarily, we do look at the revenue side of the winter because that is the easiest calculation to utilize. But again, according to this monthly, we are $2.9 million ahead of revenue. So that's why I said getting the deficit down to zero would be my goal, because then it would get tricky in using the federal funding. We could use it, don't get me wrong, we could use it, but again, it's what's called provision of government services. So keeping the government running basically, and then up to a certain amount is what we could use.
Is there anything that you all are working on as it relates to medical benefits? I know in the past, like the move to Medicare Advantage was part of the cost saving story for retiree medical. But are there any sort of short or medium term mitigation steps the city can take?
Yes, so we are looking at certain medical items, with union contracts being open right now, this is the time that we do look at those medical options and working with the union. So Mr. LeBrandy has had a few ideas, and fortunately, because of union negotiations and rules, I can't really say a whole lot about them now, but I think we recognize that medical and pension is one of the biggest costs for the cities, and that's really driven by, some of that is driven by what's in the union contracts, right? So again, this is kind of our opportunity with 6 or 7 union contracts being open to look at those things. But we are looking at things related to prescription drugs, medical coverage, and just other areas and working with the unions on it.
Is the money that we set aside each year for the OPEB trust, is that earning a return? And if so, what, at what level?
So right now, that OPEB fund is sitting in a bank account. Right now, it's because of COVID, not earning a lot of interest in everything on that. I think, some interest rates just plummet. And one of the goals prior to COVID starting was looking at investing that money. So that way we could, start to utilize that for retiree payments. Because right now, everything's coming out of the medical self-insurance account. But I believe there was a little bit over about $4.5 million in that account. And again, that grows because the city contributes $405,000 each year, and then employees contribute a certain portion out of their check. But that is one of the things on my long list of things to do, is to bring that, because that's a committee, an internal committee that was looking at investing that funding. So again, I believe it was the budget director, the controller, and our pension office. And since I am both, that becomes a little hard in getting that committee together, But we're looking at it.
On the revenue side, it says we're still expecting $1 million in fixed asset sales.
Yes, again, that is one of the revenues that I'm working with economic development and Mike Fiscal on. We did have a few sales there. There was one, I believe, that came before the board prior that they're finalizing. Could actually generate a little bit more than $1 million. So again, that's one of those I'm confident, that economic development will deliver on before the end of the fiscal year.
And then the hospital voluntary contribution is slightly above what's budgeted?
Correct. That's a calculation, looking at that calculation from the previous years and what we're expecting. Yes, that's about 200,000, I believe, more than budget. That payment usually comes to us in June.
Thanks. One more. Okay. I was looking through the capital report, and there's a negative capital balance for dashboard cameras.
So that negative capital balance, I did notice that. That's really just the formula in the monthly. So remember, we do 2 years of capital.
Okay, so that's.
And it probably did not take into account that I did not release the funding yet needed. When my staff ran the report, I didn't release the additional funding needed. So that's what that is. That's all that is. That's
Okay,
a calculation of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. Further questions, colleagues? Alder Custom. I called on you, Alder Custom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to make sure someone.
That's my job.
I just want to touch a little bit on what my colleague was mentioning regarding the APA. And he said that it's sitting in the, like, very little interest, as we all know. It's not making us much money. And you mentioned the committee. Do we also look for outside advisors to advise us on how to invest this money? And I only say that because maybe this is where Yale University can help us, since they grew their endowment so much. Maybe they can help us invest this money and grow it to a nice level?
So the answer to your question is yes. That is one of the things, remember, this OPEB trust fund is actually not that old. So that is one of the things I believe the committee prior was looking at, was investing that funding in sort of looking at some of the advisors that we have on staff, or if anyone else, such as Yale, to help us. That's as far as we got was the discussion phase on that, but I am certainly open to that once we get this up and going again.
It could be just one of those things where it could be part of their contribution to helping us here in the city and build that bridge with the city and, you know, the gap.
Nope, like I said, I am not opposed. We're currently in discussion phases, and again, I have to get that on my list of things to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions from colleagues? Further questions from colleagues? Mr. Gormley about the monthly financial report. Seeing none of them, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Gormley. Would any member of the public wish to testify on any of the three items we have heard so far? The Honeywell Building Solutions contract, the Highland Software Incorporated contract, or the monthly financial report. Would any member of the public wish to testify on any of these three items? For a third time, would any member of the public wish to testify on any of these items we've heard so far? Seeing none, a motion to close the public portion would be appropriate.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we close the public portion. Second.
The motion to close the public portion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Vice Chair.
I move that we make move item one. We move item two.
We have a motion to move item one and we have a second discussion on item one, the Honeywell Building Solutions contract. Alder Fessa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like it's the only vendor that will be able to assist us with this matter, and I encourage my colleagues to support it.
Thank you, Alder Fessa. Further discussion on item number one. Alder Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Marchand. I'm also in support of the item. Because Honeywell seems to have the monopoly, and right now the systems have to continue operating in the school. So I'm in support of the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Hamilton. Further discussion on item number one. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion carries. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, I make the motion that we move item two.
Item two has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I have a technical point to offer. I would like to ask for a motion to amend the item. The effective clause reads, now therefore be ordered, be resolved by the Union Board of Alders. It should be ordered and not resolved. So do I have a motion to amend the resolution to change the verb from resolved to order?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion to amend that was made and seconded. Any discussion on that motion to amend? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The amendment carries. We're back to the motion as amended. Any discussion on the motion as amended? Highland Software Incorporated. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, it sounds like this will continue to build on efficiency for that department. This is important for our residents to get in and out as fast as they can with whatever they need. And it sounds like this is overdue. It's just been 15 years since we had a software upgrade. So I encourage my colleagues to support this item.
Thank you. Alder Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Marchand. I'm also in favor of this because, the current system is 15 years old. You know, the records that they're holding is from 1940 to current. That's very important. You know, folks need to be able to can get access to a birth certificate, a death certificate, or a marriage certificate without waiting forever, you know, in a long line. Sometimes time might be of the essence, so it's important that we stay efficient with the record keeping system and making it accessible to the general public as needed. So I'm in support of the item and I ask colleagues to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Hamilton. Further discussion on item number 2 as amended? Seeing none, Alder Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also in support, and I think the story that we heard about the need for like an airtight migration process makes a lot of sense given the sensitivity of the data. And I also thought the testimony about the, you know, real push for more things to be on the cloud was, you know, makes a lot of sense. And it makes me wonder if there are other opportunities for the city in that regard. I know we recently approved, you know, ARPA funding for police servers. Maybe there's differences in why we want to store that data locally versus this data in the cloud, but hopefully, you know, city staff is working diligently and finding more opportunities like this one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. Further discussion on item 2 as amended? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion carries. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to remove items 3 through 7, read and file.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion to read and file items 3 through 7. These are the monthly financial reports spanning November 21st to November of 2021 through March of 2022. Any discussion of the motion? Reading and filing the monthly financial report. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Nay. Oh.
I take it, Alder Winter, you need to say aye, but not nay.
Working too much.
That is, the ayes have it. The motion carries.
I apologize.
Colleagues, before we conclude, I want to just look at that second page of our agenda and note for the record that items 8A through 8E are the principal items for our general fund and capital fund budget, both expenditures and revenues, fees, permits, and licenses. We are not going to take any action tonight on items 8A through 8E. Those will be the items before us on Thursday, and I'll say a few more words about that in a moment. But I would like a motion on items 8F through 8I.
Chair, I make a motion to remove items 8F through 8I.
These, the motion has been made and seconded. These are the.
Sorry?
We're going to do another one, Don. They're grouped a particular way. These are the enterprise fund items, which it's useful to discuss together. We'll discuss the others separately. So if folks can recall the presentations we had from city staff about the Lighthouse Carousel, Walker Skating Rink, East Rock Park, the Memorial Golf Course Enterprise Funds. The motion is to give those a favorable recommendation as they were presented. Any discussion about those 4 items? Alder Hamilton.
Pardon, I apologize. Those numbers, thank you, Chair. Those numbers are set as they are and will not change, so I am in favor of approving them as they are. Thank you.
Further discussion on the enterprise fund. I would just note for the record that the trajectory for the East Rock Park Communications Tower Enterprise Fund is that those monies are going to be spent down. It's no longer a viable enterprise. And that means in a year or 2 or 3, that will probably transition to a general fund expenditure to maintain that important infrastructure, which we use for public safety communications. But right now, it's not a viable concern in terms of generating revenue from private entities that would rent space. So that's just one thing we'll have to recommend as we move forward. Any further discussion on items F through I? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion carries. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to remove item M.
Oh, Jay.
I'm sorry, J through M. I apologize.
The motion has been made and seconded to move these items. These are the 4 special service districts. Any discussion on these items? Alder Morrison. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in support of these items as these districts have really done a fabulous job with their districts in coming up with their tax levy, and the community as a whole, those various communities have also approved this. So I too think this is in the best interest of these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Further discussion on this motion? Alder Hamel.
Thank you, Chair Martin. I'm also in favor of approval of these special services district. They work on their communities and they've got this budget approved in the district, so I'm in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Hamilton. Further discussion of this motion? I will just note for the record that one of the special service districts had a vote from its board to approve a mill rate increase, and that was the downtown special services district. The others had status quo. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion carries. And before we move to adjourn, let me just remind colleagues that our next meeting is Thursday, just a few days from now, at 6 p.m. in these chambers. We will be deliberating on the mayor's proposed budget for the next fiscal year. Those are items 8A through E on our agenda this evening. I am in receipt of a few amendments from Alder Winter, but I have not seen any other amendments yet from colleagues, but that's there in my inbox, and I just haven't seen them yet. But it'll be important for colleagues, please, to send me those amendments. It helps me prepare for the deliberations to make sure that they're well organized and we all understand what's happening. Of course, our capable fiscal analyst, Hayden, is also available for colleagues who want to make sure that they properly format their amendments so that all the numbers add up in the end. That will be our agenda. Our sole purpose on Thursday is to deliberate on the budget.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. We are adjourned.
Oh, I got that moved in.
Hold on, Frank. Frank, you see we canceled the meeting. The meeting is canceled, you saw that?
Yeah, I
email? We got too much to do that day.
This is just a busy time.
It
With
is.
finance and CDs.
Yeah,
Like,
so much.
Every night.
Every night.
Madam, and ain't nobody paying my bills but me.
Well, tell them folks.
Holiday, a space would be rented for like repairs or gatherings.
Good
night, everyone.
Good night.
I like when you wear your pants. They look nice. What was I gonna say? I don't know if they do repasses in the Q house. I don't think so. just because of the way that it's set up. I don't think so, but you can always call Yakita, Yakita Robinson.
Sometimes.
Give me a call, like a text you or email,
Okay.
then you can ask
I'm
her.
just finishing
Who
up.
dies? No, always
But
dies.
someone, well, we were trying to find a place last week.
Both my damn
We ended
cars.
up going to the West River, but head out, I wish I could have found something. I thought about the Q house.
Yeah, the Q house, they're not really set up like that. But I don't know.
Even if we bought the catering in, people that, and they can,
They will put it like this, they haven't set that up yet
okay.
for rental in any kind of.
Good to see you.
They mainly, you know, meetings and stuff like that. But as time goes on, the spaces will be rented out because that space is designed like that.
Yeah.
To be a big revenue.
It's to be.
You just go.
You know?
I look at it like maybe like a boathouse,
Yeah.
you know, I know.
Oh,
it's
it's
not-
expensive.
Yeah.
Hiver. Monsieur Hiver.
And then the song.
My friend.
Take care, good night.
Did they have something to drink back there? What they got back there?
I don't
We're
know.
getting kicked in the butt.
Yeah.
$100 million general fund, money going towards medical. We've
Yeah.
never gotten that big before. Because it's 130.
Yeah, yeah. The amendment I.
Gross.
And the amendment I sent you, I feel like well, half the money I said put towards the OPEB, the other half I said should put towards the mill rate, but I think it should just, the other half should just go towards medical. It's
So you
crazy.
found savings.
Yeah, well, some of the positions, like the ones I was talking to you about, you know, like the nurses, which I don't think will fill, the fire positions that get inserted in the budget every year.
We'll talk.
Yes.
Hey, good to see you.
You look sharp today. I like when you flip your sleeve, it's a different look.
Work attire, work attire. Thank you.
What else is there? Well, the LCI specialist, and then I think that line.
Ciao.